Pickaxe.
Hello, and welcome back to the Review of Death, your fortnightly home for Doctor Who news and reviews. I'm Matthew Toffolo, and I'm joined, as ever, by Billy Garratt-John. Hello, Billy. How are you doing?
I'm very good, mate. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, everybody.
Yes, this is our first one, isn't it, of 2024?
It is, yeah. Took a week off, but we're back.
Yeah.
We're live and kicking. We're rodding.
Yeah.
And, a whole new calendar year of things to get petulant and annoyed about, which is an exciting prospect for everybody, I'm sure.
Always good. Always good. Not really much in the way of news.
No, I was going to say.
Nothing has happened since the Church of Ruby Road, or whatever the hell it was called.
He's already putting it out of mind, Matt. He's already deciding it didn't happen.
Well, I mean, I've had people come up to me at work, talk about it, and the consensus was that people seem to have enjoyed it, which is good. People didn't enjoy the singing. That seems to have been across the board. People have gone, oh, not sure about that. Particularly when the Doctor started. I think they sort of bought the goblins doing it, but then I think everyone else, once other people started singing, they were like, this doesn't really feel like this is happening in universe. Like, what am I watching?
That seems like a universal consensus, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, that was just a bit too far.
Yeah, and the giggle, people seem to really enjoy the giggle, but it's really weird. Everyone who isn't a fan have all gone, what the hell is going on with that bi-regeneration thing?
We knew it would happen.
And I've had to say that I've pulled that face and gone, don't ask me. I don't know. I'm asking the same question as you. But they all sort of felt like they were a bit robbed of, the usual fare of how regeneration works. And then they keep asking me questions like, so is David Tennant just like sticking around then? I was like, well, yeah, I guess he kind of is. It's like, well, how does that work? I said, I don't know. I have no idea. But
interesting that of all the questions and all the threads that were left after all of those specials, that is the one that people still want answers for. And it's like, not even the Doctor Who fans, not even the Ming Mongs can give you a concise consensus on what the hell actually happened. And also, on top of that, you've got all the usual stuff that you should normally be worrying about with an upcoming season. You know, what's Mrs. Flood about? What's the Legion thing? Who's the Leap's boss? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But actually, it's kind of, for the general audience, by the signs of it, shrouded by, is he the Doctor? What's David Tennant doing? And David Tennant's, we're not going to see hide nor hair of him in the new series, I'm sure. So
yeah, it's really weird. It's been quite enlightening to sort of think, well, having seen like fan opinion on Twitter and, in our comment section and stuff, I don't want to say it quite like this, but I'm going to. Doctor Who fans seem to be taking a lot of copium to get on board with it. You know what I mean?
I'd never heard of that term until you mentioned it. I love it.
They use it at work a lot. I had never heard of it until work, and now it is part of my lexicon. and it's very interesting to see how fans this is fine. This is fine. As they snort this stuff, whereas the general public are like, this don't make any bloody sense. What? It's been interesting. It's been nice to have those water cooler moments at work again. So I'm enjoying that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Doctor Who's, in the 21st century was kind of all about that. Certainly in school playgrounds, at the very least, it was, I can't believe the Doctor got shot by a Dalek last night, or, oh my God, all those Daleks that came out of the big ball and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. It's about those snapshot moments. And it's nice the 60th gave fans a lot to stew on, but disappointing that the overriding feeling for the general audience coming out of it is, what was the bi-regeneration about? Because, it seems kind of like the least important of the threads that were left dangling, really. Yeah. The way that it's sort of been waved away is, oh, it's just, that's the way it is now, and all the other Doctors are affected by this, and there's an old Sylvester McCoy running around, and there's an old John Pertwee running around, and all that sort of stuff. It's disappointing that that's the thing that people are kind of
overshadowed it a bit, hasn't it, really? And it was weird. On Boxing Day, my older brother came over and he said, oh, I've watched all the Doctor Who's, but I've not watched the Christmas one yet. And I said, oh, well, give it a go, see what you think. And he was like, so is David Tennant in this one as well? I said, no. I said, it's the new guy. And he was like, oh, he said, but David Tennant was still around at the end of the last one. He said, I'm so confused. I was like, oh, no. Yeah.
That's really frustrating. Well, let's cast our minds back to the 60th anniversary. But before we were sullied with mentions of bi-regeneration and whose TARDIS is the original TARDIS and where the fuck did that mallet come from? Let's talk about a classic that was given a new lease of life over the 60th anniversary period, because we're actually, as of recording this and as of it going out, it's been 60 years midway point through the serial since the Daleks debuted on television.
Yeah.
And they are as big as the show itself. They are inextricably linked from now until the end of time.
Yeah.
But that original 7-episode story does come in for some stick because of its pacing. And because, you know, the earliest examples of Doctor Who on TV are not what's the right term? They're not the easiest for new fans to penetrate. There is a sort of separation you get from a modern viewing audience expectation and 1960s television. So this was an opportunity.
Like, especially like watching it after just like watching the specials, you know, you look at it and you think, oh, wow, how far television has come. It's quite incredible.
I mean, that's just Richard Martin's poor directing, but, you know.
That's just,
but this was an opportunity to give this story a new lease of life and possibly opening the door to new avenues to rejuvenate classic Doctor Who for episodes that do exist already, to bring them up to date for a modern audience.
Yeah.
Was it a massive success? We'll find out, because we're talking about the Daleks in colour. But first and foremost, Matt, what do you think of the original 7-episode adventure?
I think we've had this conversation before, but it's never been a favourite by any means. You know, it's not a favourite Dalek story. I know that sort of sounds sacrilegious because, you know, this is the story that put Doctor Who on the map. You know, if this hadn't worked, we would not be here talking about Doctor Who 60 years on. You know, this saved the programme, really. And it's funny, actually, because rewatching the colour one, it at its core, it's a good story. It's a tight story, really. You know, it's a very simple story, and it's a strong plot, but it is weighed down by the fact that the actual serial is 7 episodes long. It is a lot of plodding about and, you know, spending 25 minutes to jump over a gap and all this sort of thing, that it weighs it down. And I think having grown up watching the Peter Cushing film, rather than having seen the serial, the serial was always going to suffer because that film is so much tighter, and obviously it looks so lovely because it's in colour. This one was always going to struggle in comparison to that. So it's never been a favourite of mine. What about you?
I feel the same. I appreciate it, as you say. It's hugely important. I prefer An Unearthly Child. It almost feels as long as An Unearthly Child in some parts, even though it's only a 4-episode story, that first one. But it has that sort of 60s television pace, you know, Doctor Who is an unknown quantity to the people making it. They don't know, is this the right pace for a show like this? It's an adventure serial, but it's all very new. The actors are still getting to know each other. The technicalities of shooting this interior prop, then going to the exterior prop, and all that sort of stuff. They're still working it out. So the running time is a massive hurdle, and like you, as you said, I much prefer the movie adaptation. So you would think if any episode was ripe for this kind of treatment from those early years, this would kind of be the one, even though we have the cut down adaptation in colour with really lovely shiny Daleks and massive sets. But the biggest selling point for me wasn't the re-edit, wasn't the score, it was the colorization. I've wanted to see an official colorization of a black and white Doctor Who for years. What did you think of that? Was it something you were ever interested in seeing? And how did you feel when it was announced?
It's funny, isn't it, really? Because I think it's been one of those things that everyone has always said, oh, wouldn't it be good to see these stories in color? And I know, on some levels, there's obviously like a purist part of you that says, oh, well, it was recorded in black and white, so we should enjoy it in black and white. But I think it's nice to have that option to just, it's like looking through the looking glass and saying like, oh, in another reality, this was shot in color and this is what it looked like. And it doesn't mean you cannot watch the black and white one anymore. They've not done a George Lucas and said, this is now the canon version of this story. The black and white one does not exist. So I was keen. I was keen to see what it was like, and I've always loved seeing fans, do colorizations. I think Babel Color was the one who sort of really kicked it off back in the day, in the early days of YouTube and stuff. I remember watching his stuff, and obviously he went on to work on the DVDs for a bit. So I was keen to have a little look and see what it was going to look like. And I think really overall, I've been very impressed with how well it was done. What about you?
I mean, I was a bit put off by those initial images because, which we saw of the TARDIS interior, and I think of the TARDIS team, or the Doctor, Susan and Ian being menaced by the Daleks. Because
Barbara's bright pink
well,
jumper.
there is that, which I think is probably the most egregious colour choice in the whole thing, because it just sort of stabs you in the eyes, doesn't it? Every time it's on screen. There's no getting away from it. There's no other texture. There's nothing else to it other than pink. But I think maybe that photo of them in the TARDIS with the big blue floor wasn't the best way of selling it, because there are moments in this where it does feel a little bit like someone's just put the saturation up. On certain shots. It does look a little bit too flary and a bit too primary colours. But if you were going to colorise this based off of any surviving colour photographs of the set, really, until a Dalek glides into view, or Barbara in her apparently pink blouse, and it is a smashing blouse she has on, when a Dalek glides into view, until that point, you are just seeing greys and silvers and variations on that scale of grey. So it does make sense to actually chuck way more colour than ever would have been in the set.
Oh, for sure.
At the original print, because otherwise you're just going to be left with a kind of general haze of grey and then a couple of blue hemispheres, sort of strolling by.
And I know I'm sort of jumping ahead a bit, but obviously we know that there are more of these coming out. And the War Games is the one that's sort of been strongly rumoured in the press anyway. And whether that's the case, we'll have to wait and see. But I was quite disappointed. I was like, if you're going to do a Pat Troughton one, do like Tomb of the Cybermen. But I think it's that same problem, is that if you look at any colour photographs, not that there are really any from that story, but you can kind of tell that everything is just silver. So, what, unless you start making up the colours like they did here, and the Cybermen
Eric Klieg has just got like a purple and pink polka dot tartan jacket on. I am the magician and I wear amazing clothes.
And then the Cybermen are just, they are black and white, they're just silver. Yeah. So, you can't even, at least with the Daleks, you can paint their balls on.
So that's all I have to say about the colorization. I think it's a massive success and I'm looking forward to seeing more colorization. So I should say massive congratulations to Rich Tipple, Timothy K. Brown, Scott Burdett, and Kieran Hyman for their fantastic work colorizing the Daleks, because that was a fantastic element and something I've wanted to see for ages, and I think they all excelled in that department.
Definitely. And I mean, I think the things that really, the moments that really blow my mind is just looking at the skin color, like because you can see that, Barbara's got her eye makeup on, and there's tones to the flesh that you sort of think, I've seen colorized things before, and it does look like someone's just got a flesh-colored crayon and just colored it in, and it's just one flat color. So to see, I mean, I don't really understand how they do it, but it's too clever for my brain to comprehend. I think it's just some sort of sorcery.
It's AI. I did notice, I don't know if this was intentional, but after Temesis is killed in the Dalek ambush, and they carry his body out into the jungle, unless that was just the way the actor looked, his skin color is markedly
pale, isn't it?
Paler, which I thought that's a really nice touch. And also other nice additions, like when the Daleks go mad with the anti-radiation drug,
got the red eye,
their eyes go red. I think that's a really nice touch. So that there's some really, really lovely, and also, I suppose this is more to do with the edit, but the visual effects with the Dalek City, that lovely opening shot that cranes down from the Dalek City into the jungle, and Dalek ray gun effects and stuff. That stuff was done a lot more tastefully for this than I think a lot of the bonus additional special effects have been done for the DVDs in the past.
Yeah, I think you're right, because at least it felt very within the production, the lasers aside, everything else felt like it was very much part of it. They didn't think, right, well, we're going to do a CGI model of the city, so let's go bigger and better. Like, let's just do a faithful adaptation of the city, but just so we can do a nice panning shot or add a bit of rain in, stuff like that.
Exactly.
Whereas on some of the Blu-rays and the DVDs for classic stories, the laser effects are like way overboard, and you're like, this doesn't really feel like I'm watching a shitty Doctor Who,
Absolutely not. It's like it's always the sound of the guns that betray the effect, or whatever they've had to paste over. It's like you might as well have just left it as it is. Just add a little bit more glitter to it or something. Not reanimate the whole thing. I think there's a few 80s stories, especially with laser guns, where you think, oh no, that just doesn't work. But we've already started complaining about stuff that we're not talking about. So let's get into another element of this whole project, which of course was the new score, which was the responsibility of Mark Ayres, while also using a lot of Tristram Carey's original sort of soundscape, because it's not really a score in the original episode, is it? It's just more atmospheric bongs and whooshes and stuff like that. And also borrowing some stuff from the Daleks Master Plan score.
Yeah. Well, it was funny watching it back the other day, because this is only the second time I've watched it. And it put me in the mind of me doing one of my action figure adventures and going through my catalogue of like, now, what William Hartnell music is out there that I can use to score this story? There's
not much, I imagine.
No, not much. I mean, I don't think I would have necessarily, if I was doing a Tristram Carey Dalek story, don't know if I'd have used music from the Daleks Master Plan with like woodwind and stuff. I think that might have been a bit too egregious for me. But
I think it may have also been a bit too egregious to do a kind of bow, ba ba bow, bow kind of score through it. But we'll get to that in a bit. One thing I would like to say, which I thought was really nice, did you pick up on the, I suspect, Doctor Who and the Daleks reference in the score towards the start?
No.
Only happens once.
Okay.
And it's Barbara walking through the Dalek corridors when she first goes into the city.
Yeah.
And, it's almost a shot-for-shot remake from the TV show to the film, isn't it? Where she's coming down the corridor and it sort of pans across and then up to the security camera watching her. There is a little flourish of harps as she comes through. And I was like,
yes, there is. That has
got to be a reference to Doctor Who and the Daleks. There weren't many others. I didn't pick up on any reused sound effects, but I guess it's all a separate library and a separate license, isn't it?
I mean, I guess like we'll talk about this properly later on, but the escape sequence, the sort of montage sequence, has that sort of like 60s sort of bombastic thriller music, which, in and of itself sounds vaguely reminiscent of the Peter
music
of the Peter Cushing soundtrack. It was interesting actually watching it back. Something that I picked up on, and I don't think anyone else has noticed this, but he actually reused one of his themes from back in the 90s, Mark Ayres. So he had a Dalek march.
Oh,
theme.
Is it the bow, 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 bow?
And then it comes up a couple of times, and especially in that little montage sequence, there's like a jazzed up version. And I remember hearing it and thinking, oh, wow, this is like, I had that on LP.
We see you out there, Mark. We see you.
I had that on LP from Doctor Who magazine.
I do love, was that like the Myth Runners album or something? Was that what it was?
It was released on something, but Doctor Who magazine released it with the Absalom Dark Dalek Killer song. Yeah. So it was like the B-side of that or something.
Fantastic.
Which was,
God, what a little curio. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's
a spin-off that should happen.
Yeah. Come on.
We haven't talked about the possible Sea Devils spin-off.
Between the land and the sea and the kind of slightly awkward connotations that now drums up given a conflict happening in the Middle East. I think that an Absalom Dark spin-off absolutely needs to happen.
How cool would that be? Because then that way, if they don't want to use the Daleks in the main series, but they think, well, the Daleks sell a lot of merch, give them their own series where some mad bastard with a chainsaw is just cutting them up. How good would that be?
Who doesn't want a playset where you just push a Dalek down a little alleyway and Absalom Dark goes bang and cuts it in half? Like
it'd be amazing.
Come on.
It'd be amazing. And you could give it like a real rock and roll soundtrack and just make it really grungy and cool.
Make it Doctor Who, but metal. That would be great.
Yeah, that's it. Heavy metal Doctor Who.
That would be awesome. And cast who plays Thor?
Oh, Chris Hemsworth.
Or his brother. They are Absalom Dark. Like someone just crazy ripped to the point where you think, what supplements are you taking?
It would have been Sylvester Stallone in the Aces, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I was going to do a Sly impression then, but that might come across
like... Daleks, Adrian, just change.
Okay. So, I like Marquez. So, I need to say, I love Marquez's work.
Yeah.
Chatted to him at conventions. Lovely bloke. I love his sound that he goes for with some Doctor Who is what Doctor Who sounds like to me. It's that sort of synthy kind of, I love all of that. I love all of those descending notes and the synth stabs and all that shit. That is what Doctor Who sounds like in my head. Yeah. And on top of that, he's also responsible for a lot of the mixing and the special sounds and things. Yeah. And I think on the whole, that works really nicely as well. You've got the cloister bell going off in the TARDIS.
Yes, yeah.
There's new Dalek gun sound effects. There is a weird inclusion at one point, completely out of nowhere. One of the guns from Resurrection of the Daleks pops up and goes, ow! I was like, what the fuck is that come from?
I put that in my notes. I was like, this would make sense if the Thals had guns to fight back with.
Yeah, but they don't.
It's just like, why is that there? Yeah, it's really
so
weird.
Strange. Maybe it was just to kind of beef out the overall. Maybe it sounded really empty when he was mixing it. And he was like, I just need a sound effect here to plug a gap or whatever. But as well as new Dalek sound effects and sound effects for guns that don't exist, we have got new Dalek voices recorded by not just Nicholas Briggs, write the theme tune, sing the theme tune, but also David Graham, unbelievably.
Yes, incredible. Absolutely incredible. I love the fact that they got him back to do this. That's really nice. Especially like now that he's in his 90s. I don't know how the practicalities of that were. Did they just go around to his house while he was in bed and just say, here you are?
I think they did. I'm sure I've seen a photo. It Mark might be in the photo with him. But it's David in an armchair with a mic in his hand and he's, giving it gusto. And I have to be honest, if I didn't know he'd recorded new lines, I don't think I would have been able to pick them out necessarily.
No.
Nick Briggs, less so, because we know what his Dalek sounds like. Yeah. And they did slightly frustrate me. He's not trying to do the kind of old Dalek voices. He's just going, I am Mr. Dalek, which is a bit disappointing.
There was like one instance or two where they'd clearly sort of cut new dialogue within like a line of Dalek speech already, and
I think there were a few of those, when they're chatting between themselves.
Yeah, and they'd obviously said to Nick, do it like Peter Hawkins, or and we'll modulate it to try and match the sound. But otherwise, there were occasions when Nick Briggs starts doing his Dalek voice, and you're like, oh well, that's Nick Briggs. He has a very particular way of speaking as a Dalek. So
which is excellent. Which is we're not bashing it at all.
No,
it's just it's kind of one of those things that does sort of go, oh, Yes, I'm watching the Day of the Daleks Special Edition again. It just sort of jerks you out of it a little bit.
Your brain is not wired to hear that sound with these visuals, you know? But, you know, I think it was very good that, you know, they added in new bits of dialogue just to speed things up. There were things that they tweaked as well, that car leads get mentioned, don't they? At one point, they very cleverly tweaked that.
I wanted to ask you this particular.
Right.
What do you think about anti-radiation gloves being dropped?
I know, it's in my notes. I was quite sad, but I guess they were going to, weren't they?
It's nicely stitched, that bit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very much so. But, you know, anti-radiation gloves, drugs is a classic, you know.
I think there is a bit of a case for some of the sound effects maybe being left out, because I think sometimes it's more dramatic to not have certain sound effects going off. I think one case where it definitely works is when they're scooping the mutant out of the casing.
Yeah.
And you hear that sludgy sound. I think that's fantastic. In a case where I think it doesn't work, and I think it should have been left as it was, is when what's his name? Antidus chops his line and falls into the chasm. And you hear his body hit the floor.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's way more effective to just think he's dropped so far that you can't even hear him. Like, where does it go? Does it go down to the center of the Daleks planet? I always assumed that.
It's like an endless chasm, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a bit too on the nose, a bit too overplayed. Because then in my head, I'm waiting for him to go, hey, get me out of here. But then I forgot, that only happens in the movie. It's such a strange way you kind of twist them all together.
He's still there now.
He's still waiting. What did you think of the slightly more exuberant passages of music? Not specifically the escape scene, which I think is more down to the editing, which we'll get to in a bit.
Yeah, because I think the music kind of works there. But
okay. Did you feel a slight disconnect between, I'm hearing kind of a Murray Gold-esque score with old Doctor Who visuals?
Yes, there was elements of that, and I think just elements of this sounds like it should be. This sounds like a Sylvester McCoy story over the top of, you know, pre-existing sound. I think the problem was, in some cases, I guess, you know, the Tristram Carey score is baked into the footage because that is how it exists. And it almost feels like a bit of a cacophony of sound where you've got the sound effects, you've got the synth effects of Tristram Carey's score, which, like you've already said, is more atmospheric and weird noises rather than it is musical. And then you've got Marquez putting something else on top, and it sort of feels like they're all fighting for dominance, and it's a bit of a clash of the ears where you're like, you know, it's like the 80s and the 60s are having a fist fight of who can win. But I mean, there were some occasions where I was like, yeah, this really works. There were some lovely moments at the end, like right at the end of the story, where you get some ooey-oos, which I really appreciated.
Get some
over, Hartnell talking, which I thought was really nice. But on the whole, I did sort of think the score, again, it felt somewhat egregious and a bit like, oh, this doesn't really work. I think had it have been just keeping it more in line with what Tristram Carey was doing, I think I would have been far more on board. But because it tries to do so many weird and wacky things, and I don't know, I think there's occasions where it works, and then there's occasions where it doesn't work. I mean, I did quite like the down,
Right, let's get on to it then. Let's talk about the most important part of the updated version, which is the re-edit itself.
Yes.
Helmed by Benjamin Cook, although it is worth saying off the bat that there were nearly a dozen individuals, including Ben, credited to the post-production from assistant editors, post-supervisors, online editors, VFX. Obviously, there's people cleaning up the images, and so on and so forth, before we even get...
There's people cleaning up the studios, you know, someone's left their bloody
There's runners who maybe a runner accidentally hit the scissor button and nobody noticed in a couple of sections. You never know. That might explain some things. So, Matt, as a content producer / editor by trade, and you've brought up on occasion elements of Doctor Who's editing that maybe haven't worked in the past. Yeah. The one that comes to mind is all of the Legend of the Sea Devils. So
I think that was one of those occasions where the cleaner came in and brushed it. I was like, oh, bugger.
What did you think?
I'm sure no one will notice.
Of course it's a Welsh cleaner. Of course it is.
It's the same one from the Green Death. She's working there now. Yeah.
Actually, I did notice that I think it's one of the edit supervisors is somebody who's been working on Doctor Who every episode since, I believe, the Daleks take Manhattan, which is quite impressive. So
incredible.
There's somebody who's, thank you, Russell, for coming back. I've got a job for life. This is excellent. So I have to ask you, as an editor by trade, as somebody who has nipped and tucked and snipped at all sorts of different things, Doctor Who related, and your home movies you keep under the floorboards. What did you think of this re-edit?
So I tweeted this out actually when I watched it live, because we sort of stopped partway through. There had to be a pee break whilst they'd got into the Dalek city, and I was really impressed with how they had cut all of the start of the story, and it was really interesting watching it because you can see all the sort of tricks of the trade of like, oh, they've cut to this, and that is to cover that they've cut all this stuff. And
a big join,
and they've joined stuff together. So I thought I really appreciated that, and I think it was very clever using, again, sort of the moment that when Barbara's taking the drugs, like the aspirin or whatever she's taking for a headache.
Dropping an E, yeah.
Yeah. And then it cuts to the radiation detector on the TARDIS console, and you can hear them talking in the background. I was like, that's very clever. They do it a few times where you hear the dialogue sort of off camera, and obviously they've manipulated the sound. So I really appreciated those moments. So I think that stuff worked really, really great.
Those first 15 minutes are fantastic.
Yeah, spot on. And I when I rewatched it the other day, I thought, yeah, this is great. You've cut all the relevant stuff. We don't need to have, as nice as it is, we don't need to have the whole bacon and eggs business with the food machine.
Yeah.
Let's get on with it. I slightly disappointed that poor little metal creature gets cut. Yeah. I guess it's not as exciting as in the movie when Roy Castle falls into it. Like, I'm
just
covered in the decayed remains
slam
of this creature.
a slam cut to that these days.
Yeah.
Probably you'd think, maybe we should just get something VFX'd up to cover that instead. Yeah. But obviously that's a whole different, wormhole you're going down there to try and make that work. Yeah. So I mean, as you say, sorry, I was just going to say, I totally agree with you. First 15 minutes, the way that first episode is cut down is fantastic.
Yeah.
And there are loads of bits in this that I think are really, really great.
Yes. Me too. It was funny though, like I was watching the bit where Barbara's going around the corridors, and I thought, you probably could have snipped some of this, because that goes on for quite a while. I think you probably could have trimmed that a bit. If it meant giving a bit of time to something else, I think that could have gone. But I mean, I think the way that they kept like the reveal of the Daleks in and the reveal of the plunger, those key moments, that was good. I'm glad they kept that in, because I guess you could have easily cut some of that stuff if you were insane. But those are so iconic that it was good that they kept it. I think that when it starts to go a bit crazy is when you get to the escape sequence and the montage. That's when things start to go a bit like, oh, whoa, what's going on here? And there's just instances where they have those sort of montagey cuts where you sort of feel like, oh, hang on a minute. Is this happening? Are they talking about this happening? Or, where are they now? Are they in this corridor over here talking? Or are they actually doing this now and we're just hearing them talk about it?
Even within certain scenes, like I know, we're saying all of this not knowing how much of a fucking ball ache I imagine this was to craft. It's important to say that, because I'm sure that there were lots of things that in an ideal world, yes, we would have kept that. Yes, we would have cut that. But actually, when you put it together, A, story-wise, you need this to happen for that to happen. And B, there just isn't enough material to cover this or to make up for that. Totally understand that.
I mean, there's like weird occasions where they like flash back to something, that happened like a couple of minutes ago, and you're like, well, I don't need to see a flashback.
Big issue with, but I also understand that is being done to hide a join.
Exactly, that's it. And I guess I can imagine, as an editor myself, thinking, shit, what am I going to cut to? I want to snip this out, but I need something to join that gap. What am I going to do? I guess just show that bit again, or So I also appreciate the way that they edited a lot of the Dalek sequences because they reused a lot of shots. Like there's that whole bit towards the end when the Dalek, when the Doctor and Susan are captured and they're having that conversation with the Dalek. In the original edit, it's just one camera just behind the Dalek's head, but then they've used shots of the Dalek's front on and they flipped it or done whatever, and then they've had the Dalek talking, and it's like, oh, it's nice that you can actually have a proper conversational shot as you would shoot it today. Obviously back in the 60s, you wouldn't have done it like that necessarily. But I appreciate those little things. They were very cool little tricks of the trade that I thought, oh, yeah, that's what I would have done. If I was doing it, that's what I would have done. And I went away thinking, oh, I'd quite like to have a go at doing this. I'd quite like to take a long Doctor Who story and cut it down and try and make it a more sort of palatable edit, as it were.
I have some notes. I have some notes. Yeah. I think, yes, like the recaps, the flashbacks, they are there to kind of cover a join. Yeah. But I think there are some that just don't need to be there. Like when Barbara says, you've only just been able to start walking or whatever, or what the Daleks did to your legs. Yeah, and then we cut to Ian getting knocked out, and it's like, well, he's just started to walk in the last 2 minutes, so yes, he knows, Yeah. And then when they reference, they killed him in the ambush, and then they cut to the Thal being killed in the ambush. It's like that was about 90 seconds ago. Like, I remember, like, I cut the bit where they introduce the fact that you have to flash back. You don't need to have that first bit. It's that flashback is redundant. Yeah. I think also there's two moments where they flash back to the TARDIS team finding the drugs outside the police box. That happens like twice. Right. So that's one thing. I just think that there are a couple of those flashbacks that just didn't need to be there. Yeah. And weren't necessary for papering over whatever. Correcting mistakes is also another thing that I think is a bit of a sticky area when you're it's okay, either they're all going to get corrected, or you leave the stuff in that makes it a 60s production. And I guess you need to think of this as being, we're trying to make this as palatable as possible for an audience that doesn't watch 60s television. So sure, people don't fumble their lines anymore. I mean, sure, they do leave their scripts on the TARDIS console when delivering pieces to the camera, but they don't flub their lines. I get it. Cut that bit. But then also cut William Russell forcing his chin over the sink plunger when he's getting attacked by the Dalek in the prison cell. Because that's still clear as day. Like, so that's an error. So why didn't that get sort of snipped? And there's, I guess, I don't feel this way, but some people might feel a bit uncomfortable about changing of established history with the Dals and the Khaleds being cut and reinforced and added in. What do you think of that? Is there an element that would maybe go too far? Because Dalek history is complicated and, is timey-wimey and all over the place anyway. So is it fair to just sort of streamline it and make it all make sense?
I mean, that didn't bother me, to be honest, that they changed it to Khaleds. I've actually thought, oh, that's quite nice that they've tried to tie it all in and make it work a bit more. So that never really bothered me. And like I said, it's not like they're doing a George Lucas and saying, no, this from now on is the only version. The version. Yeah, I think had they have come out and said that, then I would have. Well, I think everyone would have been up in arms. I think we would have burnt down Babel Studios probably. But they didn't do that. That doesn't really bother me. I think that was I think that was just clever sort of fan tweaking, really.
Dare I ask, should it have been shorter than it was?
No, I don't think so. No? I think it should have been a little bit longer, because I think when sort of going back to the editing side of things, I think where the story suffers, I think the beginning's great. I think the first 40 minutes work pretty damn well. It's then afterwards, you kind of lose the relationships between the TARDIS team and the Thals. It sort of suddenly cuts, and the Doctor sat down with that girl, looking through the history, and even chatting her up. I mean, even that's cut right down. They don't really go into the full in and outs of everything. So I think that's where I would have liked to have seen a little bit more stuff come back in, because there's no real payoff to the relationship between Barbara and the Thal that's got the hots for because they cut that whole thing at the end when they're saying their goodbyes and they get the cloaks, which I think is a bit of sad, really, that we don't get that in.
Especially between Susan and Aladdin. That is quite a warm dynamic. I mean, the optics of, I guess Susan is probably 400 years old at that point or whatever, but the optics of this big, towering, blonde Hulk and this petite 16-year-old or whatever, there is a bit of a kind of, but it's actually very tender and very sweet, you know, and it's a shame that does get cut. The only reason I ask if it could have been shorter is because I feel that the pacing of the edit is the biggest problem for me. The way that it sort of lurches from, we're going to have a montage now, and now we're going to actually basically stick to the original version, and we're going to have a nice lengthy conversation. Then we're going to do this. Okay, and then it's going to calm down. Then we're going to go here.
Yeah.
It seems a bit disjointed in terms of ramping up with these montages and these great cut down sequences, and then getting back to the original 60s pace of things.
Yeah.
And I just wonder whether or not it would have been better to just do, well, here's the Cliff Notes version of the Daleks. I suppose this is what that is. But, then let's cut even more waffle out if you need to. I don't know.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? It's a weird balancing game of, what goes and what doesn't go. I think, honestly, overall, I think they did pretty well with what they kept in. I just wish there'd have been a few little bits that had remained, just like I said, just to reinforce some of the character stuff. And I think, it doesn't have the atmosphere that the original has. And that's, again, I guess, down to the fact that the way things are cut, down to the way things are scored, it creates a whole different impression of the story. But overall, I think it was a very interesting experiment. I think it was an interesting experiment. I think whatever they're doing next, I hope they've learnt from this one, and I hope they've learnt from what people have said online about things, because I think the overall consensus was that some of the editing, I think, a montage sequence would have worked fine had the story have been shot that way. Had it have been directed with that in mind and then edited into a montage sequence, I think it would have been fine. But because it's so sort of static, the montage just doesn't work. It just sort of feels like characters are sort of teleporting around the set, and you're like, wait, where are they? So I mean, nice idea, but it just, maybe the payoff just wasn't quite there. I didn't want to be too mean about it, because obviously a lot of love and hard work went into this.
Clearly.
I think it's different criticizing this and, say, criticizing Legend of the Sea Devils. Legend of the Sea Devils, which is obviously, it is made to be going out on primetime television, primetime BBC One drama. This, was a BBC Four thing that, I guess a handful of people would watch, but it was more there for the BBC iPlayer, for the DVD and Blu-ray sales, you'd have thought.
350,000 on the night. That's
that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah. It was a shame that it wasn't on a main channel. I was quite disappointed that they didn't put it on BBC One.
Well, I mean, it lost around 100,000 viewers by the time that Adventure in Space and Time came on. So maybe probably was a good idea to keep it on BBC Four. BBC Four's great for that kind of thing. It's a shame that not a lot of stuff is being but I think the remit is to not commission anything new and original for BBC Four anymore. It's supposed to be, if you want to watch old episodes of Top of the Pops, that's where you go. That's sort of what it's for now, which is a shame. I agree with you. I think it's difficult to look at this through the same lens with everything else that came out around the 60th anniversary. There was absolutely no point comparing what we saw on BBC One to what we saw on BBC Four. It's a completely different project. It's an expansion of the Whoniverse, which is obviously only a good thing. And, cool, as you say, to see where it goes. And we'll turn to Twitter in a minute just to see what people think and where it should go. I'm very pleased that we have this new dimension to this story because it's one that is essential viewing because it's the first Dalek story, but impossible for anyone who's not used to 60s television to actually watch. And I think that helps with the performances. Like you were talking about the skin tones earlier and stuff. I think besides the pacing, having something in black and white when you're not used to watching stuff in that monotone way, it kind of creates a bit of a veneer that the audience struggles to get past. It's not tangible. There's a barrier to entry and it's difficult to penetrate it. And I was watching Bill Hartnell's performance in this and I was appreciating it in a different way simply because I was watching a scene I've watched 100 times before, but now he's in living colour. And I think for that reason, it did kind of make me appreciate some more elements of his performance and other people's than it would have otherwise. Because I just think immediately you've got that barrier in front of you with the black and white,
Yeah, for sure. And it's a shame really I've not had the opportunity to show it to my nephews because watching it the other day I thought, I'd love to sit down, especially with the eldest, and see what because he likes black and white Doctor Who. He has no problem with it. He's 10 years old, but he never sort of batted an eyelid at stuff being in black and white. So fair play to him.
Never complains, doesn't struggle too much.
No, and I would have been interested to see what he made of it. I'm sure he would have loved it. I'm sure he would have thought, what a rip-roaring little adventure this is, compared to if I'd stuck him in front of the 7-parter and, it probably would have put him in a coma. But, unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to do that yet. But I will at some point in the future. So I will, at some point, I'll come back on this and just say, oh, by the way, we watched it and this is what he thought. But obviously he has no realms of comparison. He's not even seen the Peter Cushing film. So it would be nice for him to just...
That's got to be the first one.
And I think that's the other problem as well, isn't it? Is that for us, or for most people, like you said at the start, there is a colour version of this story and it's called Doctor Who and the Daleks and it's got Peter Cushing in it. So you're always going to be sort of drawing comparisons to that as well.
Of course.
So I think it will be interesting if indeed the War Games is the next one, which seems insane because it's 10 episodes long and you think, feck me, how are you going to cut that down? I haven't watched it in a long time, so I can't really sort of say hand on heart, oh yeah, you chop all this bit or chop all that bit.
Yeah.
I think it was easier to do with the Daleks because the Daleks plods along in so many places, whereas I think the War Games does an incredibly good job of lasting for 10 episodes. You know what I mean? It manages to keep the story going and keeps the momentum up.
Don't binge watch it for fuck's sake. But
no,
yes.
Don't do that. But I'd be interested to see how they tackle that if that is indeed the next one. And like I said, I hope they just sort of take on board some of the complaints about this one. Like the score, obviously Dudley Simpson has his stamp on that story with,
Quite.
I don't think it's like the most scored episode of Doctor Who ever. But I think having seen that Mark can do Dudley Simpson, he did a superb job with Sharda when he did the score for that. I hope that Mark and obviously the producers, because we can't just lay it all on Mark Hares's shoulders, because obviously people are saying to him, no, we want more of this and we want more of that. And if they're saying, no, we want more, give it more welly and give it more oomph and whatever, then obviously he's beholden to do that.
It'll be interesting to see it with a story that has a more conventional score, though, because as we said before, it's baked onto the soundtrack. You can't really remove it unless you ask Peter Jackson, please come and use your MAL system to, pull out. Lift the score off, which would be great. And I'm sure as a Doctor Who fan, he would love to do that. But it will be interesting to see how they're able to do that. And if it is indeed possible to, or necessary, to add that level of score on, because there's plenty of Dudley that you can dip into from the 70s and use, and it probably wouldn't feel too out of place in the War Games.
Yeah.
So maybe they do that and they don't
it's-
worry too much about rescoring it.
Yeah, unless it's like something from the frontier in space, or like Claws of Axos, where it's like wow, 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 and you're like, well, what? Yeah, I think it's a more percussive score for the war game.
More
so
melodic.
I think,
It sounds like if they've got an orchestra, they've got a band. It sounds like Let's have a look and see what the Rodders thought of the Daleks in colour. Tinted who I imagine with a name like that probably knows something about colorizing stuff.
You would have thought so.
The idea of colorizing classic Who stories cut down with all the padding taken out sounds like a reasonable idea. However, the attempts at new Whoifying the episode just doesn't work. Maybe next time leave the soundtrack intact at least. I think it's probably fair to say that the soundtrack is doing as much heavy lifting, papering over cracks as the edit is at some point. So I think it's difficult to say you can't or shouldn't add things because they might actually be necessary to knit things together. Especially with dialogue. You might actually need something to go bang in the corner to make that join work.
I'd love to hear like a commentary with like Benjamin Cook, Marquez and Russell and whoever else really talking about, right, so this bit here, we cut this bit because of whatever, but we've had to stick this over the top. It'd be very interesting to sort of see that and get a real sense of why things were done the way that they were. I don't know what is on the Blu-ray. I've not pre-ordered it. Jonathan has, but I've not.
I think animated menus, photo gallery, probably that, and a terrible front cover. Sorry, but fucking hell.
Yeah, it does feel, it's a bit lazy, isn't it? It's a bit lazy. They just took two publicity images and just, remember that famous scene where the Daleks break into the TARDIS?
Just remember that famous Dalek variant with no sucker arm or gun that breaks into the TARDIS? Isn't that a great scene? Pete Lambert, as an experiment, it had some fun moments. I liked it best when they went all out, like the Austin Powers escape sequence. But 75 minutes required such a hatchet job. Key scenes for the storytelling got pulverized, and Barbara wouldn't wear fuchsia pink to her worst enemy's funeral. Luke says, I think generally the re-edit worked really well and is a much better introduction to the story for new viewers, although I do feel like there were a few moments where it felt rushed, so perhaps if it was 5 minutes longer, it could have been ironed out. And it could have just been, like an extra 2 minutes means that you get an extra 5 seconds earlier on, and then that scene breathes a bit more, or you get a bit more separation from characters moving from one location to another. So I think that's a reasonable thing to have assumed there, that 5 minutes would have been enough. Darren says, the definitive will always be the original, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the colorized one was a great experiment. Some of the edits and flashbacks don't work, but as a first attempt, it was really done. I'd be keen for them to take learnings and try another story. On that, Matt, what do you want to see from the in-color collection, as it will be called on Disney Plus, I'm sure? What would you like to see next? Because you mentioned Tomb of the Cybermen. That is my pick. That's my go-to.
I'd love to see Tomb of the Cybermen because it's, I'd like to see them do a pat, and I think Tomb of the Cybermen would be a great one. I guess, you could easily cut around all the racist stuff that's in that story, the dodgy stereotypes there. But
give Toberman some lines.
Give Toberman some lines, I think that would be a great one. And I think, you'd have to, like we said at the start, you'd have to really go into it and say, right, we need to completely come up with a color palette for this story. Do you go into the Egyptology side of the inspiration of this story and go, well, let's make it sort of pyramid-esque and, give it sort of golden yellowy walls or whatever, doesn't necessarily make an awful lot of sense for the Cybermen. They'd be like,
it doesn't.
No. Don't get
Why
too
did
close
we get
to the
that
walls.
contractor in? Oh, God.
Bugger.
I think that
it was
works
those sirens with their bloody with their Egyptian theme. Those bastards, they bloody gold walls. Feck me. Cyber Controller's all right. Works. He hasn't got a chest unit.
I think that you're true. Yeah, he's got away scot-free there, although he does have exposed brains. So, just if he slips and bangs his head on the side of the console, he's in big trouble. Brain leakage. I think that is a good idea. But the trouble is that the best scenes and most of the story that you want to see takes place in the tomb. And that's just going to be frosty colours and then silver things coming out of a silver thing talking to... Okay, Pat's got a bit of colour in his face, but then also they're all freezing, so they all look a bit paler as well. So if you want to do one on the cheap, maybe Tomb of the Cybermen is the one to do next.
Yeah.
But I would elect, if not Tomb of the Cybermen, because now I'm coming around to the idea that I don't want that, maybe the Seeds of Death, because you've got lots of different locations. You've got some stuff outdoors. The foam can stay the same colour that it is in the original black and white version, so you don't need to worry about colorising that. And you've got big green lizard monsters with red... Fuchsia pink fucking foam. I want to see somebody colorise that and send it to us on Twitter. You've got big, massive green lizard monsters with red eyes who kill people with a really cool, warbly visual effect. Like, that can look great as well. And then you've got all the control banks of T-Mac control and all that. I think that would be... I prefer to see that before the War Games. Yeah,
that was actually going to be my second choice, was the Seeds of Death. I don't know what else you'd have from the Hartnell era, necessarily.
The Aztecs would look cool. The Rescue, you don't really need to cut that down unless you want to do like a 5-minute version. The whole thing is just a montage. I suppose if they ever found episode 1 and episode 3, whichever one it is, the Toymaker would be great to do.
Toymaker would be good. I guess even like the 10th Planet also, if they found that still runs into that same problem of white. But I guess the 10th Planet Cybermen have got a bit more colour to them than a usual Cyberman.
Well, they've got fleshy hands, I suppose.
They got fleshy hands, they're because the colours of those Cybermen are always up for contention. But I think seeing from people who are in the know, because I think the action figure isn't quite right. I think the mask, the stocking is more of a pale blue, and their whole outfit is more of a pale blue than it is silver. And they've got like the lines that you see on the toy, which are like painted in metallic grey, those are like red and blue, I think. So there's a lot more colour there than we're used to seeing with our Cybermen. So that would be quite interesting.
Someone send us an anatomically accurate Cyberman, that would be great to see. I like that idea. I think perhaps the chase would be decent because you've got Daleks again.
Yeah.
And it would sort of fit a frenetic, we're going over here now, we're going over there now sort of pace, that would work. That would
be good, actually. And obviously we should probably talk about the little montage that they put at the end of this story, and seeing all the little clips from different episodes.
That red Dalek. Oh.
The red and blue Dalek from the cover of the Target novel, which is great.
Beautiful.
I think people on Twitter are like, "Oh, character options, quick, release that as a set." I mean that was cool, and they had clips from the chase in there. They had Count Dracula doing his good evening. There was a don't go. So the opportunity to do other things is there for sure, and it'd be interested to see what they will do if this continues to be a success. But like nothing really jumps out at me other than the two that we've mentioned. I mean, to be honest, it'd be nice to see anything in color. The Time Meddler in color, that'd be quite nice. You've got stuff on the beach, you've got stuff in the forest, you've got the monastery. There's quite a few different areas there.
Well, there's quite a few good suggestions that I've just seen looking at the question we asked on Twitter, which was which Doctor Who story should get the in-colour treatment next. Daniel Crinoid has got a fantastic suggestion. Yeah. I'd be down for a Wizard of Oz-like approach to the Mind Robber that goes into colour once Pat wakes up in the land of fiction.
Oh, that would be cool. That would be cool. That would be very good.
Cut around and snipped about because it's sort of all over the place and suddenly they wake up in another realm and, all that sort of stuff. That could be ripe for a little bit of,
that's a really good idea.
Around.
Yeah.
And you could cut all of not Jamie from the story if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Because that's all padding anyway. Like that's super padding, isn't it?
Yeah.
James Kelly, the first colorized scene I saw from a 60s story was The Seeds of Death, and that looked amazing. Would be well worth completing. Dave Jarvu, I'd say whichever has the sharpest resolution for surviving materials, Seeds of Death, for example. But I'd especially like to see one unedited, over and above how many could get the treatment, a reversal, but equally valid application of the less is more philosophy. And I suppose, though, you're looking at the budget of, editing a 125-minute bit of footage versus 75 minutes. And I think that probably has something to do with why it was the length it was. Otherwise, why not do a 90-minute colorized version of the Daleks?
Yeah.
And maybe there is one out there, just like Peter Jackson has a 26-hour version of Get Back. Maybe that you could do that. But I think we'll probably see more fan edits, because that's something that exists in a lot of fandoms, but not really in Doctor Who particularly.
No. The Ark, that'd be another good one, I think. The Ark would be quite fun.
Would be great. That would be fantastic. Would love for the invasion to be shortened and colorized due to how much time is arguably wasted in Vaughn's office, but obviously, we're going to have to cut
I rewatched that actually the other day. I rewatched the invasion, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had just... It was Christmas Eve. I watched it on Christmas Eve. Yeah, we were sat around and we were like, I had a hankering for a Doctor Who, an old one, and I thought, I might watch Tomb of the Cybermen because it's a good comfort story. And I thought, now I always watch Tomb of the Cybermen. I haven't watched The Invasion in a long time, so we sat down and watched.
How did the animation hold up?
Great, yeah. I was watching it and thinking, gosh, it's a shame we didn't get more done by Cosgrove Hall, because they really nailed it. They did a great job with the animation. But yeah, that's it.
Slightly annoying though. I'm interested in talking more about this, but because you just watched it so recently, we're probably going to have to wait a year for us to do the invasion now. So you've forgotten what you thought of it. Jamie says the Sensorites, although maybe just a cut down without the jarring music choices and some scene cutting, just a cut down version of a 60s episode. I think that would look great in colour. I mean, we know what the Sensorites look like. They have kind of pale blue boiler suits, right?
Yeah.
And here, bearing in mind it would be cut down, this is from FR Pip, I think the War Games would work best. Huge variety of eras, costumes and colours, and you could easily keep it pacey and still coherent at 90 minutes. Okay. So, a lot to stew on there. I think that this is a really exciting avenue for Doctor Who to go down, and something that would have only, until the Whoniverse started and Russell came along and was like, right, no, we're going to do a big empire, something that would have only been reserved for the DVDs and the Blu-rays, and it would have been made on that budget, which is tiny, I'm sure, compared to what was given out over the course of a year to produce this. So I'm certain that they're already working on things. If there are rumours that people are happy enough to substantiate that, the War Games is going to happen, I'm sure there's stuff being worked on, which is very exciting. So for all of the flaws or things that maybe we would like to see tweaked or done differently, this was a fantastic first effort in the In Colour series. Yeah. And it leaves me excited for more, because I don't mean this in a backhanded compliment way, but they can only get better, And it's only a good thing to get more Doctor Who in colour at this point. The seal has been broken.
Yeah, for sure. I think the way that I've approached it, and some people might disagree with this, is I'm always treating it like a fan project more than like an official thing. Do you know what I mean? It has that sort of feeling behind it, like, okay, well, we're trying to do this out of love and respect for the original. And I think, so long as they, keep in mind the things that sort of everyone was saying. I think it was, on the whole, everyone had the same sort of criticisms about the same sort of things. So, I think it would be foolish not to take on board some of that stuff when doing the next one. But yeah, I'm intrigued to see what the next one will be and how it will ultimately turn out. Because, like you said, it's just nice to see black and white Doctor Who with a bit of colour in its cheeks.
It is. It's fantastic. And at the end of the day, you've still got the Daleks to go back to, just as you've still got the old versions of Red Dwarf. Nobody talks about remastered. And you've still got the old mixes of Beatle albums. And let's not talk about what they did on the Red and Blue album. It was a great thing to see Doctor Who being given this new lease on life. So that's it from us today. Thanks very much for watching, ladies and gents. Next up is the 2024 Roddy Awards, which
I've got my bow tie here already.
Excellent. Well, I've got the award that
you've got the awards,
try and send out to whoever wins whatever award. I'm sure this would go on Russell's shelf alongside Saturn Awards and whatever else he wins. But yes, the Roddies are next, and voting has already closed, so I can't encourage you to go over and do that. But you had your chance. It's been bloody hammering you over the head with it on Twitter for the last couple of days. So that'll be exciting. That'll be fun. Johnny will be back. And he'll be pouring scorn over Big Finish and anything else that I guess gets in his line of fire. So look forward to that.
Lovely stuff. Well, we will see you then in our black ties. And before then, have a nice week. And enjoy yourselves. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.